On June 29th of 2019, my girlfriend and I sighted a total of 5 Bigfoot while riding horse and mountain bike together on a trail just west of Mount Hood above the Sandy River. I immediately reported the sighting to the BFRO and North American Bigfoot Center in Boring, Oregon, thinking that people need to know right away that these creatures are out there. Later, I had a few Bigfoot researchers contact me, Cliff Barrickman from Finding Bigfoot and Joe Beelart from the Oregon Bigfoot Highway, and they asked me questions about the sighting, and I gave them details about what happened. About a month later, at the beginning of August, I was interviewed by a local TV station, and they showed that interview in the Portland area. Because we train endurance horses, we're constantly in the outdoors, and we go camping pretty much all the way from spring through fall, and we go to a different campground every weekend. The weekends that we're not camping, we're racing the horses at different camp areas all over Washington and Oregon. In 2016, when we first got the horses, we started going out camping, and that's when different encounters started happening. We've had whoops, tree knocks, rocks thrown at us. All kinds of different things have happened since then, but it was June 29th of last year that we had a group sighting of Sasquatch. Things started to change over the last 4 years of having encounters when we go up into the mountains, and I started looking into more about what these things were up to, what they were doing. And up until last June, I was just an enthusiast. I wasn't a researcher. I'm just an outdoorsman. I really wasn't wanting an encounter with a Bigfoot, and this one lasted for hours, all starting with Bigfoot chatter and then ended up with the sightings. After having multiple encounters a year and then the sightings, I've decided to help other people that are new at finding Bigfoot, and I put together a video series called Beginner's Guide to Hunting Bigfoot. In this series, I make reference to the several encounters I've had and tips on how to have some of your own based on what's worked for me. Again, I wasn't trying to have encounters, it's just the stuff I was doing attracted them, and so that's what the series is about, is doing the things that attract them to you. I've been asked to tell details about the group sighting, and so here we go. It was on June 29th of 2019. It was a Saturday afternoon, about 4 o'clock or so. It had been raining off and on, but the weatherman had said that it was supposed to clear, and so we decided we'd go on a 14-mile ride on a loop that goes up towards Mount Hood and then hooks back down into camp on the opposite side of camp. The loop is really hazardous, and most riders only ride part of it just because it's so steep. But we climbed up the 6-mile trek to the top, which is just switchback after switchback because the mountainside's so steep. Got to the top and was riding across a series of ridges and just enjoying the view of Mount Hood. It was absolutely amazing. It started to be a blue sky day and everything was going just great. We were there to train our endurance horses, and my girlfriend rides the horse. I really don't have very good horsemanship, so I've built a 1,000 kilowatt electric mountain bike so that I could ride with her. I have it geared down really low so I can climb really steep hillsides and stay with her. Again, the trail up was very steep, and of course the horse just rails right up it like a champ. I struggled near the peak, and I kept crashing over and over trying to climb over big boulders. The bike would just flip over backwards on me when it got too steep. So I'd have to pick the bike up and lift it over the boulder and continue up the hill. When the horse and I get separated, we make calls to each other that are loud and sound like a crow, but off slightly. We make a noise that goes like caw, caw, but really loud as we could do it. Our calls can reach quite a ways away. We can hear each other pretty far down a trail. It does a couple things. It lets us know where each other's at, but it also calms the horse down as it comes up on the bike, so it doesn't think it's some strange alien device thing. One of our horses is sure-footed and doesn't mind the bike. The other one is a little more skittish. Doesn't mind the bike once it realizes that that's what it is. So my girlfriend got out ahead of me while we're climbing the peak for a couple reasons. She wanted some distance. My shouting from crashing and yelling out in pain was kind of making the horse skittish, but she also didn't want to hear it. So anyway, she got up ahead of me and I just kept crashing. I tried to keep the bike upright, but it was just so steep it kept flipping over backwards on me. So you could hear me shouting probably a mile away. I was in a lot of pain, plus doing the cacaws to let her know I was still behind her. I was making a lot of noise. Once I hit the tallest peak, before we started to descend, I could barely walk. I was in so much pain because I kept falling over and hitting my ribs and knees and legs on boulders, and some of them were cutting me, other ones would just bruise me. Once over the peak, that's when the encounter started. I had broken my brakes on one or more of the crashes, so I had to walk the 100-pound bike 6 miles down really steep ridges back to camp. My girlfriend was waiting for me just on the other side of the peak, and we stopped and talked for a while, tried to enjoy the view, and drank some water. We talked over our plan and decided that she should go ahead on the horse and I would follow, pushing the bike down the hill. As we were discussing our plan, her horse started to act very strange. It kept looking over its shoulder and focused on something in the trees below and behind us. I've never seen it focus so hard on something that was in the trees line before. It was really, really strange to me. After about 5 minutes, I took a picture of it and where it was looking, thinking that later I could blow it up and see if there was a bear or a mountain lion. It had taken a lot longer to get up to the peak than we thought it would, and we were looking at probably getting back to the truck after dark. Neither one of us had flashlights, so we thought we better get going. So my girlfriend started her descent, and after she was a few minutes ahead of me, I started to push the bike down the hill. So this is when it started to get real creepy for me. I started to hear voices. It was a type of chattering. It sounded like a family of hikers, I thought, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. It was loud and it sounded like men, women, and children, but they were like mumbling, and the small ones sounded very excited. It started behind me where our horse was staring, then quickly moved around the hillside, and then they got out in front of me. I couldn't believe the speed they were moving at. It just didn't seem humanly possible on that steep of ridge and that dense of forest to be able to get around me that quick. It sounded like they were within about 100 feet of me, and the tree line started about 50 feet below me, so they were just back of the tree line. But I couldn't see anything. At first, I was kind of happy to think that I was close to camp and was maybe hearing campers, but when I came to a rock slide, it was a big clearing that dropped off down the mountain. I could see how steep it was, and I realized that it couldn't possibly be people. It was way too steep for them to be going across it and carry any speed at all. It was right then that I just kind of freaked out. I realized it couldn't be people, it had to be something else, and everything just kind of came crashing down. Hearing them talk was just an overload, and still hearing them move towards my girlfriend was really freaking me out. I wanted to protect her, so I tried to go as fast as I could to catch her, and was calling out to her. She had gotten about a half-mile ahead of me down into the forest, down these steep ridges we were dropping off of, and couldn't hear me. After the group of chattering whatever it was went past me and got further down the hill, I could hear them fade off into the distance down towards where my girlfriend was riding. The forest just got completely still and quiet. I couldn't hear a sound. For about a half hour, it just completely was silent. After it had gone silent for about a half hour, I started to hear footsteps way up the trail behind me, and they kept getting closer and closer. They were so loud I thought it was another horse that was out riding. So I would stop and listen, and after 2 or 3 steps, it would stop too. The hillside drop through the trees is so steep and it's so narrow that it's really hard to get off the path to let a horse by, so I kept thinking I need to be ready at any second because this horse is going to come around me and I need to be ready to get out of its way. These ridges are basically a 3,500 foot drop down into the campground, and they're all so steep that you can't go straight down the ridge. It cuts back and forth. It zigzags down so that so you can go down them safely. And there'll be like 100 feet, 200 feet of straight path, and then it has a sharp turn and cuts back into the mountain back the other way. So whatever it was that was following me it seemed purposefully slamming its feet, just pounding the ground when it walked, and would stay just behind whatever turn I'd just gone through. And when I would stop walking, it would stop walking like a step or two later. It was really kind of starting to freak me out for a couple of reasons. One of them is that a year or two before, a lady got mauled up within a mile of where I was, and a big 200-pound cougar just tore to pieces. So I was looking intently into the forest to see if there's anything moving around. I didn't want to get attacked by a mountain lion. The footsteps followed me most of the way down the hill. Then they stopped about a mile up from the bottom of it. And again, the forest went quiet. Within just a short period after they went quiet, I heard one single whoop noise, and then just silence until I got to the bottom of the hill. That last mile or so down the hill, when the footsteps stopped behind me, I just felt like I was being watched, and I was just pretty helpless. I didn't have my machete, which I carry on my bike to cut blackberries and stuff out of my way. I didn't have anything to defend myself, and it just felt like a mountain lion was going to pounce on me at any second, or a bear or something. So I was hyper alert, and I was looking everywhere. I was just watching intently as I went down the trail and looking off to the sides just to check and see if there was anything there. I didn't want to get ambushed. I finally made it down the 5 or 6 miles off the summit back down into the valley that the river runs through. We're quite a ways away from camp, but at least it was on small rolling hills and not in these steep ridges anymore. When I reached the bottom of that hill, my girlfriend asked me if I'd heard or seen anything back up on the trail, and I just told her no, I didn't see or hear anything. She asked me if I'd heard or made some whoop noises, and I told her that I didn't make any whoop noises. And she just kind of looked at me. I could tell she was agitated, but we needed to move on. It was just about twilight. It was starting to get dark, and we didn't have flashlights, so we needed to find our way back to camp. At that point, at the bottom of this hill, we still had a fairly deep creek we had to cross, and quite a bit of trail to get back to camp. And we hadn't been on this trail before, so we didn't know if we were an hour away or 3 hours away from camp, so we really wanted to keep moving. I decided not to tell her at the bottom of the hill what I'd heard up the ridge. I didn't want her to freak out, and we just needed to keep our heads and move back to camp. So we collected ourselves and moved on and went over some rolling hills that brought us to a creek crossing. Her horse is just amazing. The water was probably about 30 feet wide and about 2 feet deep, but moving really fast. It was spring runoff, so it was moving real fast, and her horse was just a champ. He just jumped right in and crossed over to the other side. We couldn't cross in the normal crossing spot because it was covered with large logs that had fallen over from a windstorm or something. So where we crossed, it was a pretty big drop right into the water, and then you go across in quite a bit deeper water than you would where the normal crossing would have been at. Because the water was so deep, I was afraid to push my $2,000 electric bike across it. I thought I might burn it up. So my girlfriend got off her horse on the other side and tied it to a tree, and she actually walked back and helped me carry it through the water to the other side. It was just awesome of her to help me like that. Once on the other side of the creek, we started up the trail and got about 1,000 feet up the trail when she realized that she had left her riding crop back at the river when she tied her horse up to the tree. So she asked me to hold her horse, and she walked back to get her crop. And just a few seconds after she left, her horse was starting to act really uneasy, and it kept looking over to a meadow that was next to the trail. That it had some trees in it, but it was pretty open. And then it would look back down the trail at her, and then back towards this meadow. So it was kind of spinning around in a circle, and it kept looking up into the meadow. So I look over in the meadow, and I'm trying to see what it sees, because it's seeing something. And I notice what looks like a burn mark on a tree. At least that's what I thought it was at first. It kind of looked like a man in a hoodie, but it was way too big. It was like 10 feet tall. Big, and so I just kind of dismissed it as a burn mark. So the horse is pulling me around a little bit. I'm trying to keep it settled. I'm trying to get it to eat grass, and normally you cannot stop the horse from eating grass. That's all it wants to do, but it didn't want anything to do with the grass, and it kept looking over in the meadow, and then it would look down the trail towards my girlfriend. So I looked back into the meadow, and when I did, I noticed that the burn mark had moved, and it was closer to me, and it was rocking back and forth. And at that point, I just thought, what the hell is that? And I'm trying to hold the horse, which wants to go back down the trail to where my girlfriend is, and I'm trying to get a look at this thing that's in this field, and it's twilight. Enough light I can see across the field, but not enough that it lights this thing up real well. I couldn't see its face, but I could see its arms moving, and I could see its hands, and I could see how it was built. And it was about 9 foot tall. It was jet black. It had giant, big arms, big legs. This thing was just massive. I would guess it's probably 3.5, 4 feet across the shoulders. It just looked gigantic, and the more I looked at it, the more that it kept overloading me. It kept walking towards me real slow. It was rocking back and forth, and then it would stand perfectly still, and I have this horse tugging on me and wanting to go, and I'm trying to hold it. So I look down at the horse, I look back up, and the Bigfoot moved closer to me, and I'm rubbing my eyes. I'm just trying to rationalize what I'm looking at. It just was just too much. It was an overload. I had to wait there because my girlfriend was still down by the creek, and we needed to go to the opposite direction to get back to camp. And it was a long wait. It seemed like a half hour, but it was about 8 minutes. In the 8 minutes, this thing had started like 200 feet away, 250, something like that, and had moved in within about 100 feet of me, 150 feet of me. And it just stood there staring at me, rocking back and forth. It's really hard to explain the absolute terror that I felt. It was just like total dread, terror to me. I just felt overloaded. I almost felt like stunned, like I could barely move, and I just felt like everything was going in slow motion. After about a few more minutes, my girlfriend was walking back up the trail, and I pointed over towards the meadow, and I asked her, "Do you see anything in the meadow over there?" And she said, "Yes, there's about a 9-foot tall Bigfoot rocking back and forth, staring right at us." By now, the twilight is turning into darkness, and I told her, we gotta go. We gotta go right now, and let's get out of here. So we grabbed the horse and started walking up the trail, and the horse was just acting completely agitated. It just wanted to, I could tell it wanted me to let go and just let it run, but I kept holding it back. It kept nudging me and pushing me along. It wanted me to move faster. So anyways, as we went up the trail, my girlfriend told me that she had seen 4 more of them on the last mile of the trail coming off the hillside. That was the spot where I felt like I was being watched, and apparently I probably was. She said that 2 of them were above the trail and 2 of them were below the trail in a short distance, and she could see they were just behind trees, peering out from them. They'd have like an arm around a tree and show just part of their upper body and their head. As she went by, she would see them out of the corner of her eye and look over, and they would either stand perfectly still or they'd move slowly back away. One was peering over a log and slowly ducked down and tried to hide itself, partially hide itself as she went by. They never did completely hide themselves. They only partially hid themselves and then just froze. But she saw 4 more coming down the hill, and they were all dark and black like the one that we both saw in the meadow. She also said that they were making a whoop noise as she came up to them, and then after she passed, and they kept whooping as she went off down the hill. They seemed to be very interested in her riding that horse, and just came in real close for a good clear view of her riding the horse as it went by. When we left the meadow with the giant Bigfoot standing there, it just stood there and watched us walk off. It didn't follow us. It was just rocking back and forth and watching us leave. I kept looking back over my shoulder, and I could see it just standing in the same spot watching us as we walked off. Once we got a couple 100 feet up the trail away from it, and the trail started to widen out, and there were fewer trees, and it was more broken up space through there, I started to feel a little bit more relaxed. The horse didn't, though. It just wanted to push on and kept pushing me from behind it with its nose. It wanted out of there. This is really unusual behavior for this horse too. It never tries to do anything like that to me. It's usually very well behaved. So we pushed on through a couple of different trails and found our way back to the main road. We were probably 3/4 of a mile away from the main road from where we sighted the giant inside the meadow, and we were just a lot closer to the road than what we even thought we were. When we hit the road, it was almost pitch black, and couldn't hear anything. The forest was just absolutely quiet. All you could hear is our horse's steps as it walked along, and the ticking of my 10-speed mountain bike as I pushed it down the road. From where we came out on the road, it's about 1,000 feet, or give or take, back to our campground, and then another couple hundred feet down to our camp. We had camped on kind of the outskirts of the camp and not in the middle of it, liking a little bit more privacy. The first thing I did when I got back to camp was I grabbed my .45 and I chambered around, and that made me feel a little bit better, but still extremely shaken from what we saw. The second thing I did was I had a big stack of firewood that we were going to use to have a fire all night. I threw it all on at once and lit it up, and had one of the biggest fires I think I've ever made. Just trying to get as much heat and light out as possible. After I got the fire going, we started to cook some dinner, and we put our dogs out in their, we bring a pen along, we put them in their pen and let them walk around, and the dogs were just completely silent, didn't make a noise. They were just watching us cook and hoping to get some scraps or something. It only took probably a half hour to get the fire going and get dinner made, and we sat down to eat, and I ate a bunch of ibuprofen and aspirin. I was so bruised up, and my girlfriend was very sweet. She brought some ice packs out and helped me ice up. But we sat there for a little bit in complete quiet, and then things started to change. We heard a very loud whoop noise coming from the north side of our camp, and it sounded like it was really close, but it's so pitch black up there, and there's so many trees, you can't really see very far. I had a flashlight, a really high beam one, that I'd shine at the trees, but didn't see anything. And about a minute or two later, from the opposite side of camp, heard another really loud whoop noise, and not long after that, heard a tree knock from the east side of camp, and that's from the side where the creek was and the mountain that we had just come down. After that, it just went silent, and we sat there finishing up our dinner very quietly, and I put the dogs back in their kennels and back in the truck, and we decided to call it a night and go to bed. So we went into our camper, and we're laying there about, at least I did, about half asleep, and just listening for any noise whatsoever outside, and had my gun right next to me in case something happened. But got lucky, nothing else happened that night, and woke up in the morning very scared, very sore, but was just fine. We both had to go to work the next day, so we wanted to get home early enough to unpack the camper and have dinner and everything. So we left the campground. I would have walked back down into the meadow to look and see if there were any signs of something, but number one, I was pretty much scared half to death to go down there, and number two, I was so bruised up I could barely walk, and it took about 2 or 3 weeks for me to get past all the damage I did from crashing my bike so many times. So we got back that that night. It was a Sunday night, and I believe that's when I reported to the BFRO and to Cliff Berrickman's North American Bigfoot Center, the activity that we had. I just felt that people need to know that these things are out there, and there's quite a few of them, and be careful when you go camping anywhere up around Mount Hood. I had an encounter years ago when I was visiting a friend out by Hag Lake, Oregon, and was riding a bicycle home late at night, and I had a couple minute encounter with one. I saw it running across a field. It was paralleling me, and that scared me. It terrified me to see that thing, and I was out there all alone. But that absolutely pales in comparison to this sighting in June. The one that walked right towards me, it was a giant. It was so big, and I was terrified. I had no way to defend myself, and I was worried about my girlfriend. I was worried about the horse. It was just, well, horrible. Would I want to see it again? At a distance. I wouldn't want it to come that close to me ever again. That was just too much. But anyways, now after having multiple encounters per year for the last 4 years of camping and mountain biking and horseback riding, I've put together a set of videos to tell people what's attracted them to me. We've kind of got it figured out, and we're seeing that it's pretty much the opposite of what most people are doing. And so I thought I would put this series of videos together to help beginners see one and increase your chances of having a sighting. The guide is free on YouTube. It's called The Beginner's Guide to How to Hunt Bigfoot. And what I've done is I've used the different encounters. I talk about them in the videos, but I use them to describe how they came about and what attracted the Bigfoot to us, or what we think attracted them to us. But like I said before, we've had them throw rocks at us, we've had them scream at us, we've had them make whoops, I've had them push trees down, just all kinds of other types of activity before this sighting. And there's definitely a pattern to that, so enjoy the videos. I hope they help you have an encounter yourself. I'm an outdoorsman that spends quite a bit of time in the forest, and I've learned these techniques, and I just want to share them.